Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is CJ. I'm going to give you guys a quick update on the Reef. I really haven't covered it much over the last year I've had this tank, and I figured it's a good time to really talk about sandbed maintenance and my thoughts as far as, maintaining a clean sandbed and, my thoughts as far as what kind of sand you should choose. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. This video is not going to be as long as usual, but it should be helpful to anyone new in the hobby. Let's go ahead and get to it. So I know a lot of you all may have wondered what type of sand I have in my tank. Here it is. It's going to be by Corris. It's the pink Fiji sand, and specifically the Reef grade size. And I'm going to mention that because it's really important, especially for me, because I love tons of flow in my Reef tank, and the Reef grade size is the larger grain, and it really does a great job of staying put. I mean, if you watch my channel, if you've been following me, I love cranking up the flow, whether it was my MP10 running it at 80, 90%, or this Maxspect Gyre running it at 50 or 60%. That's tons of flow compared to the size of my aquarium. And with, if you choose the wrong grain sand, if it's sugar fine or too small, trust me, it would just be a dust storm and it would not stay put as well as this stuff does. Now, the second reason I decided to go with this type of sand was the way it looks. I really wanted something that is going to be kind of a whitish, off-white color with specks of color in it. And that's pretty much what you get with this pink Fiji sand. The name's misleading. It's not all pink. It's more of a white sand with speckles of pink. So the video doesn't really show it. The camera never picks it up. But in person, trust me, it looks really nice in my tank. And I'm really satisfied with the way it looks. Now, the third reason I chose this sand was because I knew it was just small enough to provide the right habitat for any kind of, sand-dwelling fish, whether it be some sand-sifting gobies. It's not too big for them to sift. And it's not too big for, my wrasses to bury themselves. Specifically, my Christmas Wrasse and my yellow Corris Wrasse. Those guys bury themselves at night. And I really got to make sure I provide enough habitat and enough room for them to do that. So with that being said, that's pretty much it. The size of it allows flow, habitat, and it looks good. So when it comes to maintenance, there's really two trains of thought with this. The first being to just not touch it. Let it naturally handle itself. Let the copepods, the bacteria, the worms, whatever life you have in your tank, keep your sandbed clean. And then there's the second train of thought, which I believe in, which is cleaning it. Siphoning that stuff out, getting all the detritus, keeping it stirred up, and not letting anything build up that's going to contribute to your nitrates or, any kind of decaying matter in your tank. So when I first started my Reef tank up, a little over a year ago, I had 1 to 3 inches, I would say actually, in some places 3 to 4 inches of sand. I ended up using roughly 40 pounds of the pink Fiji sand, thinking that, hey, that's the perfect amount. I'm aiming for a semi-shallow sandbed. I didn't want a deep sandbed. Failing to realize I was kind of setting myself up for failure. So I would say roughly 2 to 3 months in is when I really started noticing a problem. I was like, man, why is so much crud and, poop and waste and all this stuff building up on the bottom of my sandbed when it's not really that deep? I had to make a change. I was like, this is definitely going to end up hurting me in the long run. So I ended up taking out roughly half the sand from my aquarium. So I ended up going from dealing with 3 to 4 inches of sand all the way down to a half an inch or an inch maximum as far as the back of my tank. And it's really made a huge difference with, a few things, honestly, that I've noticed. First huge benefit that I noticed whenever I had my sand-sifting goby was that he can actually reach the bottom of my tank, meaning everything that was building up on the bottom layer was no longer happening. And the second thing I've noticed, I was able to slope my sand from the front of the tank all the way to the back, meaning I was eliminating that layer of sand that was growing algae that was really, unsightly, that you can see through the front part of the glass. I really hate that look. So it's something you'll really notice on my tank. The front of the glass really has a dusting, I would say, if you was to describe it, just enough to cover it for aesthetics purposes. And then the back of the tank, I have it sloped to the deeper part. And that's where, I provide the habitat for my wrasses to bury themselves. Roughly an inch or so is pretty much all they need. And the front of the tank is just for looks. So definitely has made a huge difference, especially when it comes to, keeping everything clean and keeping everything suspended. I can take this turkey baster and kind of blow all of it around. And as you can tell, the bottom of the tank is just right there. It's just one puff away and I'm getting everything up into the water column. So definitely a huge difference. Recommend, anyone that is thinking about, hey, do I want to go deep sandbed or shallow sandbed? I'm not going to tell you which one to go with, but if you decide to go with a shallow sandbed, go as shallow as possible. No reason to go, 3 to 4 inches or 2 to 3 inches. If you're just doing it for aesthetic purposes, go as shallow as possible, just enough depth to support whatever life you want, whether it's any sand sifters or, fish that bury themselves. And if you're not going to have any life that needs deep sand, then don't have deep sand at all. Just have a dusting throughout your whole tank. So definitely something that I had to learn, and it's a lesson that seems simple enough. So I think it's something that may be overlooked, but it's made a huge difference with me being able to, keep my tank as clean as I keep it and keep my sand as white as I keep it. So definitely a little food for thought. So one of the huge benefits of having this gyre on my tank, it's capable of so much flow. Whenever I crank this bad boy up to 100%, it really does a great job of taking whatever I stir from my sand bed, pushing it through my overflows, and allowing my filter floss to really do the work for me. So, if I'm not doing a water change at the time, which I don't all the time, in the middle of the week, I can stir the sand up, crank the flow up, change the filter floss out as needed. And, essentially I'm removing all that detritus from my tank the easy way. So that pretty much covers my process on, maintaining my sand bed. Not really anything complicated. I would just say it's good old manual labor or, good tank husbandry. And it's really done a great job keeping everything white and clean and exporting as much, detritus and waste from my tank as possible. And I'll say it's definitely helped me keep my nitrates low and in check. And it also has helped, keep my sand bed from growing any kind of diatoms or cyanobacteria or any of those things that you really want to avoid, make your tank look dirty or look like it's having some kind of issue. So with that being said, let me kind of cover a few things I've tried in my tank when it comes to, livestock that are supposed to really keep your sand bed clean that I've noticed really haven't done a great job. And the first myth I would say is going to be Nassaris snails. I've seen this so many times in the hobby. People say, hey, get some Nassaris snails, throw them in your tank. They're going to live in your sand bed, crawl through it, stir it up, keep your detritus out of your system. Now, they do bury themselves, but in my experience, they do a terrible job of keeping your sand bed clean. Literally, they bury themselves and they're not really moving that much. And they may surface, to eat some food, but they're really not stirring it up enough. Now, the second thing I've noticed is going to be the conch snails. I have one in my system, and I can tell you without a doubt, that guy cannot keep up with this much sand and keeping it clean. I'm thinking I would probably need an army of them to really make a dent. And I've noticed, if I don't touch my sand, diatoms and all the other stuff I don't want growing on it, it does grow. So with that being said, there is one thing that I've added to my tank that I miss that really was a huge factor with keeping it clean. That's going to be my diamond Spot Goby. Now, it's no longer in the tank, but that guy, with my sand bed being this shallow, I would say without a doubt, he completely eliminated me, having to do any of this maintenance. I could literally skip a week or two and the sand bed will still be completely white. So for anyone, thinking, hey, what can I add to my tank to keep my sand bed clean without having to worry about it? If you have a shallow bed, diamond Spot Goby is definitely the way to go. Of course, you may have to get them eating food because not enough sand won't support them as far as the life in the sand. But when it comes to keeping it clean, those guys do a great job. So in a nutshell, hey, don't rely on snails to keep your sand bed clean. Rely on a sand sifting goby. They'll do a better job. And if you don't have any sand sifting gobies, just be prepared to get your hands in the tank, keep up on your husbandry and make sure that, you keep it white as you can. So that's pretty much going to cover this vid. I don't want to, keep it dragging out too long. Hopefully this clears up any questions, anyone may have as far as why I chose my sand, my methods for keeping it clean, and, my livestock as far as the options that I've actually used personally. As you guys know, I try to talk about things that I've actually done in my tank and not really, regurgitate things that you may just read on forums or, things people say. So everything I've mentioned, I've tried it. So with that being said, this is going to cover this week's update. So if you have any questions or comments or anything else, definitely drop it down below. And as far as changes in the tank, nothing's different. Everything's doing well. Water quality's good. Livestock's doing well. No coral losses. Even the anemone is, starting to pop back up and hasn't moved. So all is good in the tank. So if you guys have any ideas of, any other maintenance topics that you want me to talk about or share with you guys, definitely drop it down below. And as always, hey, like, comment, subscribe. You guys do what y'all do. Y'all be easy. Happy reefing.